Strategic autonomy in global politics is not something that a nation gains overnight, nor is it a privilege granted by the world's powerful stage. It is earned through decades of consistent policy, a strong sense of national interest, and the ability to weather the pressures of global realpolitik. India's current position on the global stage is a product of this gradual evolution. At the core of this power is the fact that India no longer allows its decisions to be dictated entirely by the strategic calculations of any single foreign power, be it the United States, China, Russia, or anyone else. Instead, it has cultivated the rare ability to engage with all of them on its own terms. This balance is what many in Washington find unsettling, because it means they cannot predictably pull India into their corner whenever tensions rise on the international stage. For decades, the Cold War era had forced many countries into fixed positions with alliances defined by superpowers and smaller states playing along to gain security guarantees or economic aid. India, even back then, tried to walk the tightrope with its non-aligned movement leadership, but economic constraints and military vulnerabilities often limited its independence. Today, those limitations have drastically reduced. India can simultaneously buy military hardware from Russia, negotiate trade deals with the European Union, conduct joint military exercises with the United States, and still stand apart when Western nations call for unified sanctions against adversaries like Russia or Iran. They send a message that India values its national interest above all else and is willing to challenge the binary thinking that still dominates many parts of Western foreign policy. Strategic autonomy also means India can pick and choose its partner for specific needs without compromising sovereignty. For example, while the US may expect India to side more aggressively against China in the Indo-Pacific region, India has been careful to manage its own border disputes and regional dynamics without becoming a proxy in a superpower rivalry. Even in multilateral forums like the Quad, India plays a unique role. It participates in joint naval exercises and strategic dialogues, but avoids turning the grouping into an explicitly anti-Chinese military alliance. Similarly, when the Russia-Ukraine war erupted, the West tried to build a global consensus for isolating Russia, but India resisted the pressure to cut its energy imports or condemn Moscow in absolute terms, instead calling for dialogue and diplomacy. This refusal to follow the script of Washington or Brussels is not defiance for its own sake. It is a calculated assertion of sovereignty, and it demonstrates that India's decisions are not swayed by momentary geopolitical trends. One of the major reasons America is cautious about this development is that strategic autonomy reduces the effectiveness of its global influence tools. In the past, US economic and military aid often translated into diplomatic alignment from recipient countries. With India, however, the situation is different. Despite the deepening trade ties and increasing defense cooperation with Washington, India will still make choices that directly contradict American preferences when those choices align better with Indian priorities. This unpredictability makes India a less. Furthermore, India's growing global partnerships strengthen its independence by engaging with the BRICS bloc, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the G20, while also deepening its ties with Western institutions. India ensured that no single camp can isolate it without facing significant global backlash. The diversification of deployments, procurement, trade relationships, and diplomatic forums means India is not hostage to the whims of any one country's policy. For the US, which is accustomed to allies falling in line during crises, this creates an uncomfortable reality. They must treat India as an equal partner whose cooperation has to be earned through mutual benefit, not demanded through pressure. Another element of India's strategic autonomy lies in its control over critical domestic sectors that foreign governments once hoped to dominate. By strengthening its indigenous defense manufacturing, bolstering food and energy security, and pushing for digital sovereignty, India is reducing external vulnerabilities that could be exploited in moments of political disagreement. The more self-reliant India becomes in these domains, the less susceptible it is to sanctions, trade restrictions, or diplomatic isolation, tools that America and its allies have historically used to bring nations into compliance. This ability to say no without risking national collapse is a form of power that resonates far beyond the corridors of diplomacy. It influences how India is perceived by the rest of the world, particularly by smaller nations seeking to assert their own independence. What makes this strategic autonomy even more potent is its compatibility with India's democratic and multicultural identity. It is not an authoritarian refusal to cooperate, but a democratic assertion of equal footing in international affairs. India is positioning itself not as a follower, but as a bridge between competing worldviews, able to talk to Washington and Moscow, to Riyadh and Tehran, without losing credibility with any of them. Its role is rare and deeply influential in shaping global narratives, trade flows, and even conflict resolution. For America, this means they cannot take Indian support for granted in the way they can with treaty-bound allies like Japan or NATO members. Every agreement, every joint operation, and every diplomatic alignment must be negotiated in a space where India's self-interest reigns supreme. The shift in dynamic is not just about India's rise, it is about the changing rules of global politics, where emerging powers can stand shoulder to shoulder with superpowers without becoming their satellite. India's technological and economic rise in critical sectors is not merely a story of GDP numbers climbing or exports increasing. It is a fundamental shift in how the country is positioning itself in areas that directly impact global power structures. Over the past 2 decades, India has moved from being a developing nation dependent on foreign expertise to a competitive force in fields that shape the 21st century: space technology, defense systems, information technology, pharmaceuticals, and now artificial intelligence. This transformation is unsettling to countries like the United States, which have long dominated these domains and enjoy the leverage that comes from technological superiority. When a country of over 1.4 billion people begins to master the tools and innovations that drive modern economies and militaries, it inevitably changes the global balance of influence. One of the most symbolic examples of this rise is India's space program. The Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, has achieved feats at a fraction of the cost of NASA or the European Space Agency. Missions like Chandrayaan-3, which made India the first nation to land near the lunar South Pole, and the planned Gaganyaan human spaceflight project are not just scientific milestones. They signal that India can compete in the strategic high ground of space. Space is not simply about exploration. It has military, communication, and surveillance implications. Satellite technology powers everything from navigation to missile guidance. And when a nation can build and launch its own systems, it reduces dependency on others while opening opportunities to sell services globally. For the United States, which has long used satellite access and space technology partnerships as a form of diplomatic leverage, India's growing autonomy in this area presents a challenge. In defense technology, India has been steadily reducing its reliance on imports by investing in indigenous weapons systems. The development of the BrahMos supersonic cruise missile, in collaboration with Russia, has already given India one of the fastest and most advanced weapons in its class, with export deals being finalized with Southeast Asian nations. Projects like the Tejas light combat aircraft, the Arjun main battle tank, and advancements in drone technology demonstrates India's determination to control the production of its own military hardware. This means that in future geopolitical disputes, India is less likely to be constrained by arms embargoes or supply chain disruptions orchestrated by Western powers. The US, which has historically held a technological edge in military hardware to secure strategic partnerships, now faces a partner capable of saying no to arms deals because it can produce its own competitive systems. The economic dimension of India's rise is equally significant. Its IT sector is a powerhouse, providing software solutions, cybersecurity expertise, and data management services to clients across the globe. Major American corporations rely on Indian talent for both innovational and operational efficiency, creating a dependency that subtly shifts the balance of power. India's dominance in outsourcing has now expanded into higher value areas like artificial intelligence, blockchain technology, and machine learning. When a country can combine a massive skilled workforce with rapid advancements in cutting-edge fields, it becomes more than just a service provider. It becomes a strategic player shaping the future of global tech ecosystem. The US, accustomed to being the epicenter of tech innovation, now has to compete for dominance in fields it once monopolized. India's pharmaceutical industry further adds to this influence. Known as the pharmacy of the world, India produces a significant portion of the global supply of generic medicines and vaccines. During the COVID-19 pandemic, India's role in manufacturing and distributing vaccines to dozens of countries highlighted how its industrial capabilities can have global humanitarian and political impact. Control over essential medicines is not just an economic advantage. It is a geopolitical tool. Countries that can produce and supply life-saving drugs in times of crisis hold bargaining power over those that cannot. For the US, seeing India take center stage in this domain is a reminder that soft power and influence can come from sectors beyond the traditional military and tech realms. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and clean energy technologies are emerging as the next arenas where India's presence will be felt. Government initiatives like Digital India and Startup India, combined with private sector innovation, are fostering a robust environment for tech growth. India's emphasis on renewable energy, especially its rapid expansion of solar power capacity, positions it as a leader in the global transition to sustainable energy systems. This shift is not just about climate responsibility. It is about controlling future energy markets and technologies, areas that America has long sought to dominate. If India can develop and export affordable renewable technologies, it could become the preferred partner for developing nations, eroding US influence in those regions. An often overlooked aspect of India's rise is its control over massive data resources. With the world's largest population and a rapidly digitizing economy, India holds unparalleled volumes of consumer and economic data. The way it manages this data, protects it through privacy laws, and uses it to train AI models will determine how competitive it becomes in the global digital economy. For the US, where tech giants have long relied on access to international data markets, India's growing emphasis on data sovereignty represents both a commercial and strategic concern. By keeping control over its data ecosystems, India ensures that its technological advancements serve domestic priorities first, rather than being siphoned off to foreign corporations. This technological and economic empowerment is not occurring in isolation. It is backed by a growing middle class, increasing foreign investment, and a youthful demographic eager to innovate. The sheer scale of India's market gives it bargaining power that few countries can match. American companies cannot afford to ignore India, whether for its consumer base, its talent pool, or its manufacturing potential. Again, India also means accepting that it is not a subordinate economy. It is a competitor, partner, and sometimes rival in key industries. The fear for America is not necessarily that India will surpass it in every domain, but that India's rise creates a multipolar world where US influence is diluted. Technological leadership has always been central to America's global power. And seeing another democracy with the population, resources, and ambition to challenge that leadership changes the strategic calculus. The combination of indigenous innovation, global market integration, and sectoral dominance in critical industries means that India is no longer playing catch-up. It is setting its own pace and inviting others to follow. For a superpower used to leading from the front, this shift represents a profound challenge, one that cannot be met with military strength alone, one that cannot be met with the military strength alone, but requires adaptation to a new reality where India's technological and economic choices can shape the future as much as America's.